Welcome back to our channel for Sherlock Holmes series, written by Arthur Conan Doyle. The Three Gables. I visited Sherlock Holmes at Baker Street one morning. We had just sat down to talk beside the fireplace when the door was flung open and a huge negro burst into the room. He was dressed in a rather loud grey check suit with a flowing orange tie. His broad face glared angrily at us. "Which one of you gentlemen is Messrs. Holmes?" he demanded, and Holmes raised his pipe smilingly. "It's you, is it? Keep your nose out of other people's business," the negro threatened Holmes aggressively. "Keep talking," Holmes replied. "You won't sound so fine after I'm through with you," the man said as he approached Holmes. "Look at that, Master Holmes," he said as he swung a huge fist under my friend's nose. Holmes examined the fist carefully. Perhaps it was because Holmes displayed icy coolness, or maybe because I made a small sound as I picked up the poker. But our visitor did calm down somewhat after that. "I have given you fair warning," he declared. "Don't interfere in the Harrow way. Got that?" "I have wanted to meet you for a long time," Holmes stated. "You're Steve Dixie, aren't you?" "That's my name," the negro replied. "You'll get hurt if I get angry." "That will be the last thing you'll need," Holmes said. "But what about the murder of young Perkins outside the Holborn bar?" "What, you're surely not leaving, are you?" The negro had jumped back and his face had become dark now. "I won't hear such talk. I didn't do anything." "I have been watching you," Holmes stated. "Please help me, Mr. Holmes," the negro pleaded. "I won't unless you help me," Holmes replied. "Quickly now, who sent you?" "Barney Stockdale." "Who set him on to it?" Holmes demanded. "I don't know, Mr. Holmes. That's the truth." The negro whimpered and ran out of the room as quickly as he had entered. Holmes laughed. "I'm glad you were not forced to smash his head, Watson. He's harmless, really, and easily scared, as you just witnessed. He belongs to the Spencer John gang, and his immediate boss, Barney, is much sharper. Their forte is assault and threats." "But why threaten you?" "The Harrowfield case." Holmes showed me Mrs. Marbilet's note. "Dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I need your advice regarding the many strange incidents that are happening with me in connection with this house. You can find me at home any time tomorrow. It is walking distance from Wheel Station. Mary Maberley." The address given was the Three Gables, Harrowfield. We reached the house after a brief railway journey. The brick and timber villa sat on its own large garden. Its name was displayed by 3 projections above the upper windows. The house looked drab and depressing from outside, but the interiors were well furnished. Also, the lady who received us was an interesting elderly person, bearing every mark of refinement and culture. "I do recall your husband, madam," Holmes said, "but it has been some years." "Perhaps the name of my son, Douglas, is more familiar, Mr. Holmes," she replied. "Dear me," Holmes exclaimed as he looked at her with interest. "Are you the mother of Douglas Maberley? Why, all of London knew him. He is a wonderful person. Where is he now?" "He is dead, Mr. Holmes," Mrs. Maberley replied. He was working in Rome and died there of pneumonia last month. I'm so sorry, Holmes stated. One cannot connect death with such a lively man. He did live intensely. Too intensely, Mrs. Maberley insisted. That was the end of him. You did not see the moody, sad, and brooding man he had turned into a recent times. He had been converted into a depressed man from a happy one in just 1 month. His heart had been broken. A woman? Holmes guessed. Was it a love affair? An evil person, but I did not call you to talk to you about my son, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Watson and I are at your service. I have lived in this house for over a year now, and I wanted to lead a retired life. I had very little contact with the neighbors as well. 3 days ago, I got a call from a house agent. The man told me his client was interested to buy this house. It did appear strange, as there were several similar houses on the market that could have met his needs. All the same, I was interested. The agent stated that his client wanted to buy all the furniture in the house as well. I agreed and quoted a good lump sum. The man agreed instantly, and the bargain seemed good, as I always wanted to travel the world. The man arrived with an agreement yesterday, and it was good that I showed it to Mr. Sutro, my lawyer in Harrow. He said that it was a strange document. If I signed it, I could not take anything out of the house, including my private possessions. I pointed this out to the man when he arrived. I told him that I intended to sell only the furniture, but he insisted that I sell everything. A few concessions could be made for my personal things, but his strange client insisted on buying everything in the house. Suddenly, Holmes raised his right hand to silence Mrs. Maberley. Then he moved to the door and flung it open to drag inside a thin woman. "Leave me alone," she screamed. "Leave me alone," she screamed. "What is this, Susan?" Mrs. Maberley asked. "Ma'am, I was coming in to ask if the visitors were staying for lunch when this man did this," she protested. "You have been at the door for 5 minutes, Susan," Holmes explained. "You breathe too heavily for that kind of work." "Who are you anyway?" Susan demanded. "Mrs. Maberley, did you confide in anyone that you were about to write to me and consult me?" Holmes inquired. "No, Mr. Holmes." "Who posted your letter?" "Susan." "Precisely. Now, Susan, whom did you tell about me?" Holmes demanded. "No one." "Now, Susan," Holmes stated, "it's not a good thing to tell lies." "You're a liar, Susan," Mrs. Maberley exclaimed angrily. "I recall now that you were speaking to someone over the hedge." "That's my own business," Susan replied. "The man was Barney Stockdale, wasn't he?" Holmes asked. "Well, why are you asking me when you already know?" "I was just making sure, Susan. Now tell me, who is behind Barney?" "Someone richer than you are." "A rich man?" Holmes stated. "No, wait, you smiled. It's a rich woman. You might as well spill out the name now, Susan." "I'll see you in hell first." "Language, Susan." "I have had enough of you all," Susan exclaimed and ran out the door. "Goodbye, Susan," Holmes said, and then turned to us. "This gang is a professional one. Your letter to tell me had the 10 p.m. postmark, Mrs. Maberley." Yet Susan passes off the information to Barney, who conveys the news to his employer. After instructions, Steve is roped in and I'm threatened at 11 next morning. That's quick work indeed. But what are they after? "Do you possess anything valuable?" Holmes demanded. "No." Then I think you have something that you don't know about. But what, Mr. Holmes? You have been living here undisturbed for over a year. No one wanted anything from you during this time. Now, suddenly, in space of 3 days, your house is in serious demand. This can only mean the object has entered the house only recently. I interrupted Holmes. Settled once again, Holmes stated, "Has anything arrived recently, Mrs. Mably?" "No." Holmes inquired if there was another maid other than Susan, and Mrs. Mably replied that she had a young girl too. Holmes urged her to have Sutro spend a few nights at her house as she might need protection. "Do you have the house agent's address?" Holmes asked. "I have his card. Haynes Johnson, auctioneer and valuer." "I don't think he'll be in the directory," Holmes concluded. Honest businessmen do not conceal the name of their office. Holmes asked Mrs. Maberley to let him know about any fresh developments, and we took our leave. But as we walked through the hall, Holmes' sharp eye fell on several trunks piled in the corner. "These are Douglas things," Mrs. Maberley informed us. "Why haven't they been unpacked?" Holmes demanded. "When did they arrive?" "Last week." "This must be the missing link," Holmes exclaimed. "This is what they're looking for." But Douglas did not have anything valuable, as he only had his income and a small annuity, Mrs. Maberley protested. Holmes instructed that Douglas' things be taken up to Mrs. Maberley's bedroom. He asked her to examine them to see what might be in them. "I shall come back tomorrow and find out," he said. Holmes then took my leave, saying that he had to consult Langdale Pike. Holmes took Langdale Pike's help on all matter of social scandal. Pike was his human reference book when it came to London gossip. In return for Pike's help, Holmes helped Pike acquire knowledge. Holmes and I reconnected early next morning in his room to be greeted by bad news. Our client's room had been burgled in the night. A telegram from Sutro informed us about it and urged us to come at once. We reached the Three Gables to find the police already there. The inspector informed us that it was an ordinary robbery and that the thieves had left with a book. Mrs. Maberley apologized to Holmes about not taking his advice, as she had not wanted to bother Sutro by asking him to stay in her house. "I was conscious for a while after I was chloroformed," she informed us, "but I have no idea how long I was unconscious. I woke up to see a man at my bedside and another collecting something from my son's possession. I caught hold of one man, but he shook me off. Mary, the maid, heard the noises and started screaming out of the window. That brought the police, but the rogues got away." "What did they take?" Holmes demanded. "Douglas' book. I tore away a sheet from the man who was holding it," Mrs. Maberley said, and the inspector handed it over to Holmes, who examined it. "It looks like a page from a novel," Holmes stated. "Why would they want to steal a novel?" Holmes called me over to the window and read the lines in paper that began in the middle of a sentence. "Face bled considerably from the cuts and blows, but that was nothing compared to the bleeding of his heart when he saw the lovely face, the face for which he had been willing to sacrifice his life, looking out at his agony and humiliation." She smiled like the heartless woman that she was as he looked up at her. That very moment, love died and hate was born. Man must live for something. If not for your love, my lady, then surely for your evil and my revenge. "Strange grammar," Holmes commented. Did you see how quickly the he changed to my? Holmes and I took a cab to Grosvenor Square after that. This is our last little journey, Watson. The matter needs to be cleared up immediately. Have you heard of the Lady Isadore Klein? Holmes asked. No. She was a celebrated Spanish beauty who married the old German king Klein. She was the richest and loveliest widow after Klein's death soon after. She had many romantic adventures after that, and Douglas Maberley was one of her lovers. He was one of the most striking men in London, but he loved her and she didn't. She wanted to end the adventure after she was satisfied, and when he didn't, she had to silence him. His novel was his own story, I commented. Now it dawns on you, Holmes stated. I hear that the lady is engaged to marry the young Duke of Lomond, who might almost be her son. But she wouldn't want a scandal to ruin her happiness, would she? Ah, here we are. We had reached one of the loveliest corner houses of West End. We were received by one of the most elegant and beautiful ladies we had ever seen. Only her eyes were murderous. What is the meaning of the insulting message? She demanded as she held up a piece of paper. You have well understood it, madam, Holmes stated. How, sir? Your hired villains who tried to scare me. I was forced to examine this case after that, Holmes said. I don't know what you are talking about. Goodbye, madam. Holmes turned towards the door. We are going to Scotland Yard then. The lady had overtaken us instantly. Sit down, gentlemen. Let us talk this over. It was foolish on my part to threaten a brave man like you, Mr. Holmes. It was even more foolish to trust a group of rascals, madam, Holmes stated. They might disclose your secret or even resort to blackmail. Only Barney Stockdale and his wife, Susan, are aware of the identity of their employer, the woman declared. They are good hounds that operate silently. Hounds like them often bite the hands that feed them. They shall be soon arrested for burglary. I shall not appear in the matter. Not unless I drag your name into it. You would not, Mr. Holmes. But you must return the manuscript to me, Holmes said conditionally. The woman laughed loudly and walked over the fireplace to indicate the burned mass. Shall I return this to you? She asked. Your fate is sealed now, madam, Holmes said coldly. You have gone too far this time. You are too harsh, Mr. Holmes, she objected. Try looking at the story with my eyes. The sin was started by you. I admit that, she said, but Douglas was a penniless commoner. He wanted marriage with me, and that did not formulate with my plans. He became insistent and couldn't bear it anymore. I had to make him understand. So you hired ruffians who beat him up under your window? You appear to know everything, Mr. Holmes. Yes, Barney and his boys did beat him up a bit, but he did something worse than that. He wrote a book where he was the lamb and I the wolf. The names of the characters were different, but everyone in London would have realized that it was our story. He had every right to write something like that. Well, he wanted to publish it and I begged him not to. Then he died suddenly. I had to get that manuscript to save my reputation. So I put the gang at work and Susan entered the house as a servant. I did not want to do anything illegal, Mr. Holmes. That was the last resort once everything failed. What was I supposed to do? My whole future was at stake. Holmes shrugged. I think it's only fair that a settlement be reached. Tell me something, how much does it cost to go around the world in first class style? The lady stared at Holmes in astonishment. Is it possible with £5,000? Well, yes, Mr. Holmes. Good. I think you should sign me a check for that then. I shall see that Mrs. Maberley receives it, as you do owe her a change of scene. But meanwhile, lady, Holmes waved a cautionary forefinger. Do not forget that you cannot play with edged toys forever without cutting those elegant hands of yours. You were listening to The Three Gables. If you have enjoyed this audiobook, then please subscribe to our channel. Thank you for being a Verteller listener. We will be back with another audiobook shortly. Until then, happy listening.